Thanks. Now I can light an old gold and listen to Frank Sinatra. Night and day, you are the one, only you neath the moon under the sun.
When the blue of the night meets the gold of the day, someone waits for me.
Ken Carpenter welcoming you to Philco Radio Time, produced and transcribed in Hollywood with John Scott Trotter, his orchestra and chorus. And now here's song singer Bing Crosby.
Bird's Eye Frosted Foods present Bird's Eye Open House, starring Dinah Shore with her special guest, Andy Russell. And now here's Dinah.
Put your arms around me, honey. Hold me tight. Smoke dreams from smoke rings while a Chesterfield bird.
Tonight, from the Chesterfield Supper Club in New York, here's our star, Perry Como.
Thank you very much.
You sigh, the song begins, and I hear violins. It's magic.
Yes, from Columbia Square in Hollywood, here's Warner Brothers' lovely singing star, Doris Day.
Wait a minute, folks. You ain't heard nothing yet.
This is the Kraft Music Hall, starring Al Jolson, with Oscar Levant, Lou Bring and his orchestra and chorus, and our guest, Bing Crosby.
So keep on looking for a bluebird and listening for its song. Whenever April shower come along.
Now, obviously, radio had some great, even legendary singers, and there are plenty more where these folks came from. But tonight, we're going to concentrate a little bit more on the people who wrote the songs these people sang. They wrote this. This is part of a body of work that we rather casually refer to as the Great American Songbook. But radio actually played a part in shaping that body of work. And it was one of several factors that came together during the early 20th century. And we'll allude to some of the others as we go along. But obviously, radio's contribution only goes back a century, because before radio, I mean, there was not only no radio at the turn of the 20th century, there was no television, obviously, there was no internet, there were no cellular phones. In fact, not everyone had phones. Records were in their infancy. They were expensive, they broke easily. And so at the start of the 20th century, the only way most people could hear music was by standing next to someone else who was playing an instrument. And so people bought instruments. They bought pianos, they bought banjos and violins and clarinets and guitars so they could entertain themselves and their friends. Now, it was still possible for a song to become a hit during this time, but in the days before radio, songwriters and publishers would gauge the success of a song entirely based on the sales of sheet music. Now, a lot of song publishers would distribute sheet music to music stores across the country, and the music stores would actually have someone on hand playing the piano for anyone who wanted to hear a few bars of, say, Thanks for the Lobster. Obviously, it didn't always make a song into a hit, but there were certainly songs from this time that became very famous, and some that we could probably still sing a little bit of today if the occasion called for it. In My Merry Oldsmobile, or Wait Till the Sun Shines Nellie, or, well, Take Me Out to the Ball Game, which dates back to the start of the 20th century. When radio came along, it changed the way that songs could be heard. And as a result, it changed the way that songs could be sold. Now, someone like you or I could stand at a microphone in Chicago or St. Louis and be heard in the other person's city, you know, and everything in between, and all the land where that was farm country, that had just as much access to these sounds as anyone in an urban city environment. And what's more, when we were hearing it in Chicago or in Missouri, they were hearing it at the same time in New York City and Terre Haute, Indiana, and Beaumont, Texas. And now, suddenly, you could hear music being performed by total strangers. And as methods of distribution improved, you could use the national exposure of radio to sell records or sheet music. See, now you've written a song that gets sung by Frank Sinatra on a coast-to-coast radio show. That is a level of exposure that Thanks for the Lobster never enjoyed. So obviously, for a songwriter, radio was rife with commercial possibilities. And as a frustrated musician named Jack Benny knew, songwriting was rife with comedic possibilities.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, in honor of Don Wilson's 15th radio birthday, I will play a song that will soon be sweeping the nation. Thanks for the Memory. Hit it, Phil.
Okay.
Wait a minute. See who that is, Mary.
Oh, Jack, it's Leo, Robin, and Ralph Ranger.
Oh, Leo and Ralph. Hello, fellas.
Hello, Jack.
Well, boys, you couldn't have picked a better time to drop in. I was just about to play your new song, Thanks for the Memory.
Yeah, we heard you announce it last week, and we thought we'd come over.
Oh, that's nice. That's awfully nice.
Say, Jack, we'd like to talk to you for a minute. Do you mind?
No. What is it, fellas?
If it's okay with you, we'd like to talk to you alone.
Oh, certainly. Mary, do you mind stepping out for a minute? You too, Kenny and Don.
Okay, sure. We'll take care.
You want me to go too, Jack?
No, you stay here, Phil. After all, there are two of them. All right, boys. What's on your mind?
Well, Jack, I don't know how to start
Let me handle this, Ralph.
My goodness, what's all this fuss about? And
You know, Jack, we wrote Thanks for the Memory just a short time ago. It's fairly well known now, but it hasn't reached the peak of its popularity yet.
Well, if there's anything I can do, boys,
You know, that song means more to us than anything we've ever written.
Well, I appreciate that.
And we wouldn't want anything to happen that would stunt its growth.
Stunt its growth? Well, I'm not going to smoke when I play it, fellas. Now, come on, just what are you driving at?
Well,
Well, what? Come on, get down to brass tacks.
all right. How much do you want not to play Thanks for the Memory?
What?
We'll give you $200.
Oh, trying to offer me money, eh? Do you boys remember what I did for your other song, Love and Bloom?
Yeah, I wish we had money then.
Now, in fairness, we should point out that Robin and Ranger were perfectly fine with Jack Benny using Love and Bloom as his theme for 40 years. Obviously, during this time, there were songwriters who became famous. But as I mentioned earlier, there were songs and songwriters who had been famous at the start of the 20th century. Some of them are lost to the mists of time. Others managed to show some staying power. And chief among these was Irving Berlin. Now, in early 20th century, before radio, Irving Berlin was already writing songs like Alexander's Ragtime Band and Mandy and A Pretty Girl is Like a Melody, and for a show I guarantee none of you have ever seen called Yip Yip Ya Fank. Irving Berlin wrote the melody that would become God Bless America. And that's already a pretty good lineup right there. Then he wrote for the stage, he wrote for Broadway, and he wrote Blue Skies and Heat Wave and I'll Be Loving You Always and Easter Parade. And if he'd stopped right there, we'd be talking about a giant in American music. But then he wrote for the movies, and he wrote Cheek to Cheek, and he wrote Puttin' on the Ritz, and he wrote what many people in 1937 considered to be the quintessential wintertime song, I've Got My Love to Keep Me Warm. And then, of course, 5 years later, he wrote the actual quintessential wintertime song, White Christmas. So just think, Irving Berlin has written at least 3 songs that all of us are guaranteed to hear once a year, at least, for the rest of our lives. That's not bad. That is staying power. Well, in 1946, Irving Berlin was approached about writing the music for a new Broadway show, and he hesitated, in part because he didn't need the money. I mean, he'd written White Christmas, for goodness sake, but also because he was not the producer's first choice. And I don't say this to suggest his ego was wounded. Their first choice was a composer named Jerome Kern, who had died very suddenly at the end of 1945. And Irving Berlin was a great admirer of Jerome Kern. He did not want to besmirch the memory of Jerome Kern by perhaps writing something that wasn't suitable for the show. But finally he told the producers, give me a weekend. I'll see what I can do. So he rented a hotel room in Coney Island. He had his own piano put in the room. And that weekend, Irving Berlin wrote 3 songs, including There's No Business Like Show Business. And between the songs of Irving Berlin and the performance of Ethel Merman in the title role, Annie Get Your Gun was a tremendous success. As a result, Irving Berlin's staying power was never greater than when he and Al Jolson made this appearance in 1947 on Bing Crosby's Philco Radio Time. And even though Al Jolson fancied himself to be the world's greatest entertainer, it's Irving Berlin who gets to sing.
And now to present a man whose songs have done all right by me, and everybody else, I guess, who has done them. I can think of only 2 words to introduce our foremost writer of popular songs, and 2 words, Irving Berlin.
Thank you very much, Bing. It's nice being on your program for the first time. I must say you have a very easygoing and casual show.
Well, we got to be casual. The script isn't written yet, Irving. Irving, how about you singing something for us?
Well, Bing, I don't sing very well. As a matter of fact, I don't think I can sing at all.
Oh, Jolson's going to love you. I remember in This Is the Army you sang a song. How about doing that old tune of yours that you did in that show? How I hate to get up in the morning.
All right, I'll take a shot at it.
Oh, you're sent. John Scott, give Mr. Berlin a little of your expert musical background, huh?
Shoot.
Sustain him in his hour of travail.
Oh, how I hate to get up in the morning. Oh, how I'd love to remain in bed. For the hardest blow of all is to hear the bugler call. You gotta get up, you gotta get up, gotta get up this morning. Someday I'm going to murder the bugler. Someday they're going to find him dead. And then I'll get that other pup, the guy who wakes the bugler up, and spend the rest of my life in bed.
Bing, we'll never be able to follow that.
I ain't gonna try. I don't know what to.
Irving Berlin would probably be the first to tell you that as a singer, he made a great composer. But that's all right. He was a giant of American song, and he could carry a tune, thankfully. Now, of course, Irving Berlin was not the only songwriter who was writing for the stage at this time. And a lot of songs that we would put in the Great American Songbook have their roots in the Broadway theater. Songs like, Anything Goes, Begin the Begin, Let's Do It, It was just one of those things. I get a kick out of you. Now, all of these songs actually have something in common, in that they were written by a young man from Indiana. But he was not a stereotypical Hoosier farm boy. He was a cosmopolitan city boy through and through. And he wrote some great songs, as those titles will prove. He wrote some great lyrics, as we will prove momentarily. And he was a pretty good singer as well, as he will prove on this clip from a 1935 Flashman Yeast Hour, hosted by another fellow who was very well known as a singer in the early days of radio, Rudy Valley.
From 50 Million Frenchmen to the Gay Divorcee, the words, music, and lyrics by Cole Porter have appeared on many a theater program and many a hit song. His original melodies and his literate rhymes have, year after year, kept him close to the top position among popular composers. Right now, he's at the top. The reason? His sensationally brilliant score for Anything Goes, a show that has taken this show-crowded town by storm and placed Cole Porter squarely in the Broadway spotlight. He's here tonight in person to sing for us one song from the show, a number that perhaps represents his finest work to date. Mr. Cole Porter singing, You're the Top.
I'm going to interrupt for just a second to deviate slightly. You don't need me to tell you it's been a wild year, these last 12 months. And I figure all of us deserve every break we can get. And any little special thing we can do with our time, now especially since we're spending so much of it at home, is always welcome. So tonight, I invite you to sing along with Cole Porter. Now, I know that you're all on mute, so let that remind you that you don't have to be inhibited. Even if you don't like how you sing, we can't hear you. So go to town. And to make it easy, I regret I do not have a bouncing ball, but I do have the lyrics for You're the Top.
Word poetic, I'm so pathetic that I always have found it best, instead of getting them off my chest, to let them rest unexpressed. I hate parading my serenading, as I probably miss a ball. But if this city is not so pretty, at least it'll tell you how great you are. You're the top, you're the Colosseum, you're the top, you're the Louvre Museum, you're the melody from a symphony by Strauss, you're the Bengal bonnet, a Shakespeare sonnet, you're Mickey Mouse, you're the Nile, you're the Tower of Pisa, you're the smile on the Mona Lisa. I'm a worthless check, a total wreck, a flop. But if, baby, I'm the bottom, you're the top. You're the top. You're Mahatma Gandhi. You're the top. You're Napoleon Brandy. You're the purple light of a summer night in Spain. You're the National Gallery, your Garbo salary, your cellophane. You're sublime. You're a turkey dinner. You're the time of the Derby winner. I'm a toy balloon that's fated soon to pop. But if, baby, I'm the bottom, you're the top.
Okay, very nice. I saw some of you feeling along. That's lovely. And for those of you who didn't, you have one more chance. Seize it.
You're the top. You're an arrow collar. You're the top. You're a Coolidge dollar. You're the nimble tread of the feet of Fred Astaire. You're an O'Neill drama. You're Whistler's mama. You're Camembert. You're a rose. Your Inferno's Dante, you're the nose of the great Durante. I'm a lazy lout that's just about to stop. But if, baby, I'm the bottom, you're the top. You're the top. You're the Swanee River. You're the top. You're a goose's liver. You're the boy who dares challenge Mrs. Bear's son Max. You're the Russian ballet. You're Rudy Ballet. You're Fino Lax.
Just what you think it is.
You're romance. You're the steps of Russia. You're the pants on a Roxy usher. I'm just in the way, as the French would say, de trop. But if, baby, I'm the bottom, you're the top.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you. I know I couldn't see all of you, and I know I couldn't hear any of you, but getting to see some of you sing along made my day. So, and I know Cole Porter would be pleased to know that a performance he made 85 years ago that he didn't expect anyone saved would still be sung along to today. And we should point out, for those of you who were wondering about it, he left out the other 5 verses. So this whole presentation could have just been about this song, just so you know. Now, most of the early shows on Broadway were presented in the style of revues. You know, the most famous example being the Ziegfeld Follies, you know, where you had dancers like Burt Williams or Bill Robinson, you had singers like Marilyn Miller, you had comedians like Eddie Cantor or W.C. Fields or Will Rogers, and they didn't necessarily interact with one another a whole lot, but hey, it was a great show. There were certainly attempts to create shows on Broadway where all of the elements would come together for a single storyline. One of the most famous examples is Showboat by Jerome Kern, which gave us Old Man River and Can't Help Lovin' That Man and Make Believe. And then in 1943, 2 gentlemen teamed up to write a musical in which every element, the songs, the dancing, the dialogue, would come together to tell a dramatic story. That show was Oklahoma, a tremendous success. It ran on Broadway for half a decade. And you're about to hear from the gentleman who wrote the score to Oklahoma, introduced by someone who will be well known to fans of both Broadway musicals and, well, for that matter, television musicals, Miss Mary Martin.
The stage is set, our curtain is up, and here is our star, lovely Mary Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Lytell. The most exciting news for the canteen tonight is that we've been able to persuade 2 very distinguished busboys to drop their duties and come up here and tell us something about their wonderful show. The composer and the librettist of Oklahoma, Mr. Richard Rogers and Mr. Oscar Hammerstein. Dick, I understand that the first thing that is said of the collaborators who come up with a great hit is that they were lucky. Is that true?
Well, Mary, I think that's the kindest thing.
How about you, Oscar?
Well, I think we were lucky to have Ruben Mamoulian's fine direction and those scenic designs of Lemaire's, and Miles White's costumes, and Mr. Mill's direction of the dancers.
Oh, I keep thinking about your wonderful lyrics, Oscar, and of Dick's beautiful score.
We were hoping she'd say that, weren't we, Oscar?
I wouldn't dream of interrupting her. You've got to give a pretty girl a head.
How did Oklahoma manage to get born?
Well, it was an idea of the Theater Guild. They remembered a play by Lynn Riggs, which the Guild had done, called Green Grow the Lilacs.
Yeah.
They felt there were the makings in it of a great musical play.
Dick and I were called in and took the idea from there. It was summer. It was hot. But we were determined men. After spending week after week stewing and fretting and struggling, we sat down one day and added up our progress and realized we had finished one song.
Which song was that?
The song sets the mood for the entire production. It's called Oh, What a Beautiful Morning.
There's a bright golden haze on the meadow. There's a bright golden haze on the meadow. The corn is as high as an elephant's eye, and it looks like it's flying clear up to the sky. a beautiful morning. Oh, what a beautiful day. I got a beautiful feeling. Everything's going my way.
One of the things that's really lovely about getting to share sounds from this period, particularly sounds from the golden age of radio, which was not really, these shows were not broadcast necessarily with an eye on preservation, is that what we have here is an inexpensive form of time travel. You know, for 2 minutes, we were back in the summer of 1943 with Rodgers and Hammerstein, who at this point had written one hit musical. We know something they don't know yet. We know they're going to go on to write Carousel and South Pacific and The King and I and The Sound of Music. And they're going to change American musical theater forever. And that's still in their future. What an exciting time they're going to have. And we got to hear them before they knew all that was happening. Now, we've talked about the songs that were written for the stage, but with the dawn of radio came the dawn of the talking picture. In 1927, the very first commercial talkie, in the movie theaters was The Jazz Singer, starring Al Jolson. You knew where there was going to be talking, there was going to be singing. And a lot of great songs that we would consider standards, got their start as part of film musicals. You know, films like 42nd Street, Going My Way, Singing in the Rain, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, lots more where these came from. And there was a fellow who went to Hollywood because he had envisioned himself as an actor. And that didn't quite pan out, but he did find himself working as a singer and then as a lyricist. And he had a hand in writing over 1,000 songs, collaborating with the likes of Duke Ellington, Harold Arlen, Hoagy Carmichael, and Henry Mancini. Well, here he is on Armed Forces Radio in 1944, introduced by a woman who will be known, I think, to fans of both stage musicals and screen musicals, Irene Dunn.
As you all know, the barometer that indicates the American taste in songs is the hit parade. Well, we're just about to meet the fellow who holds the enviable record of having had 8 songs in the top spots, the #1 hit spot in the week. Now, if you haven't already guessed who I'm referring to, it's Johnny Mercer. Welcome to this Tin Pan Alley clam bake, Johnny.
Thank you, Irene. Glad to be here.
Johnny, get out your atomizer and spray your throat because we're going to call on you to sing one of your songs.
Well, gee, I knew my voice would make me a social success someday. You know, before I learned to sing, I was a wallflower. Just a total washout.
You don't mean it, really?
Yes, nobody invited me anyplace. But just last night, I sang at a party, and 2 fellas invited me out in the alley.
Oh, Johnny, I think you've got a cute voice.
Oh, I guess it's all right, but it's always cracking.
Oh, well, everybody's voice cracks once in a while.
Yeah, but with me, when I sing shortening bread, it comes out crumbs. You can take it. I can try and dish it out, Irene.
Well, Johnny, Command Performance has received requests for everything from That Old Black Magic and Dearly Beloved to G.I. Jive and Accentuate the Positive. But the one that the fellas always ask for most is that blues classic, the one you wrote with Harold Arlen, Blues in the Night.
My mama done told me when I was in knee pants, my mama done told me, son, a woman'll sweet talk, and she'll give you the big eye. But when the sweet talking's done, a woman's a two-faced, a worrisome thing who'll leave you to sing the blues in the night.
Now, we've talked a little bit about all these factors that came together that coincided with the dawn of radio. I mean, there was the emergence of Broadway as a theatrical mecca, the emergence of the movie musicals in Hollywood, But there was still another important development taking place during this time. A generation of musicians had fallen in love with a new American musical idiom known as jazz. They had joined forces. They had increased their ranks to create big bands that would play us a jazz hybrid called swing. And a number of songs that we might put in the Great American Songbook are there thanks to the bands of the swing era. I mean, Cole Porter wrote Begin the Beguine, but Artie Shaw had the hit. And of course, then there was 1 O'Clock Jump, the theme of Count Basie, and I'm Getting Sentimental Over You, the theme of Tommy Dorsey. And let's face it, we cannot think of In the Mood or String of Pearls or Chattanooga Choo Choo or Pennsylvania 6-5000 without thinking specifically of Glenn Miller and his orchestra. Well, radio responded to this emerging musical movement, sometimes with primetime network-sponsored shows, but certainly more frequently with live remote broadcasts late at night from the nation's night spots, from the Aragon or the Trianon ballrooms here in Chicago, or the Café Rouge in New Rochelle, New York, or the Hollywood Palladium, or any of a myriad of places in between. The radio stations loved it because they already had an announcer on hand. All they really had to do was send him over to wherever this show was happening, have him introduce each song. They didn't have to pay any actors or musicians or anybody. The hotels and the ballrooms and the nightclubs loved it because they were getting free mentions on the air. And the bands loved it because now they were getting national radio exposure. If you're Benny Goodman's band, for instance, and you play an engagement in St. Louis, for example, that is broadcast over CBS, well, that means people are going to hear you. So when you go to Chicago, for instance, they're already primed because they've heard you on the air in St. Louis. One of the great songwriters to emerge from this jazz and swing movement was, in fact, one of the great composers of the 20th century. And a short list of his songs would include, Mood Indigo, Caravan, Don't Get Around Much Anymore, Do Nothing Till You Hear From Me, Take the A Train. Well, here he is on the radio in 1937 on a show called the Saturday Night Swing Club. And to show you just how much these musicians valued radio as a promotional tool, this musician left another gig in order to be on the radio. And if you listen carefully, you'll hear the announcer, Paul Douglas, mention where that gig is. And I think you will be envious.
Our session opens in a big way by presenting as our first guest a great personality in the modern music world. Composer, arranger, pianist, Duke Ellington. I want you to know, come on. Duke, I got a few things I want to say right from the heart and the shoulder. You're a favorite and a charter member of the Saturday Night Swing Club, and we're mighty proud and pleased to be able to have you dash over from the Cotton Club and bring trumpeter Cootie Williams, clarinetist Barney Bigard, saxophonist Harry Carney, and Juan Tizol with that. What's that he plays?
A valve trombone.
Well, now, when you put them all together, what are you going to play?
We're going to play Frolic Sam.
Frolic Sam?
Frolic Sam.
Sounds good to me, and I'm sure it suits everybody here. Duke, we're off.
Okay.
It is not.
Whoop. Someone's jumping their place in the line here. Wow. So this thing, Duke Ellington left the Cotton Club in order to be on the radio. I can't help but think if any of us could go to the Cotton Club, it would take an awful lot to get us to leave the Cotton Club. That's just me, though. Now, of course, as in any field, there are the greats, and then there are those who manage to stand apart from the others. Duke Ellington is perhaps a good example. Another is a young man named George Gershwin. I mean, a short list of the songs he had a hand in writing or co-writing would include Fascinating Rhythm, I've Got a Crush on You, Someone to Watch Over Me, Nice Work If You Can Get It. But he did more than write hit songs for shows. He also made an effort to bring jazz into the world of opera, which gave us Porgy and Bess, which in turn gave us Summertime and Bess You's My Woman and My Man's Gone Now. And of course, he made an effort to bring jazz into the concert hall with the Rhapsody in Blue. I think I have time here. I want to deviate for a second and tell you a little story about my adventures with the golden age of radio and its performers. Years ago, I got to interview a musician named Larry Adler, wonderful harmonica player, who told me the story about how when he was a teenager, he wanted nothing more than to play with Paul Whiteman's orchestra. Paul Whiteman was known as the king of jazz, in part because he's the man who debuted the Rhapsody in Blue in New York in 1924. So Larry Adler went to this theater where Paul Whiteman and his band were playing, and he stood outside the stage door, and anytime anyone walked in or out of the stage door, Larry Adler would run up to them and play his harmonica, thinking, someone here is going to have enough pull to get me backstage to meet Paul Whiteman. Finally, someone did. He took him to Paul Whiteman's dressing room. Paul Whiteman's there at his dressing room table, all the light bulbs around the mirror, and there's a gentleman in a chair sitting behind Paul Whiteman. And Paul Whiteman says to Larry Adler, "What do you play?" And Larry Adler, being a cocksure young teenager, says, "I play anything." So Paul Whiteman said, "Well, let me hear you play the Rhapsody in Blue." And as Larry Adler said to me, I couldn't play the Rhapsody in Blue, but I wasn't about to tell Paul Whiteman I couldn't play the Rhapsody in Blue. So I just said, "I don't like the Rhapsody in Blue." At which point, Paul Whiteman turns to the fellow in the chair and says, "Well, what do you think of that, George?" Yes, it was that George, the one on your screen now. Yes, and as Larry Adler said to me about 65 years later, I don't remember how I got out of that room, but I did get out of that room. Interestingly enough, over time, Larry Adler became quite famous for playing the Rhapsody in Blue on the harmonica. And now all of us have heard the songs of George Gershwin, but I'm willing to bet very few of us have heard George Gershwin. Well, that's going to change. Right now, what we have for you is an excerpt from a short-lived 1934 program called Music by Gershwin. Sonically, it's not everything we'd like it to be. This is a recording of a show that was originally broadcast 85 years ago, 86 now almost, no, 87, good heavens. And again, these weren't always recorded with an eye on preservation, but you will get to hear him introduced by announcer Don Wilson, and in turn, you'll get to hear George Gershwin introduce one of his own compositions.
It is now the great privilege of Sphenoment to introduce this vital, interesting personality, Mr. George Gershwin.
Good evening. Don Wilson said that these programs were to be intimate reviews of modern music. I'm afraid that's a rather large order. Personally, I should have felt safer if he had said that the programs were to be informal, for that is certainly what my part in them will be. I want you to feel as though you had simply dropped in at my house or I at yours to run over a few tunes that may have given us pleasure. Now I'd like to tell you the inside story of the tune we're using as a radio signature. It's called The Man I Love, and you may have recognized it at the opening of the program. This tune was written 10 years ago, and about this time we did a musical comedy, Lady Be Good, featuring those delightful performers, Fred and Adela Stair. Imagine my discomfort when the tune received such a lukewarm reception in Lady Be Good that we felt obliged to take it from the play. But my spirits rose shortly after this when Lady Mountbatten asked me for a copy of the song to take back to England. Soon Lady Mountbatten's favorite dance band, the Berkeley Square Orchestra, was playing The Man I Love. It wasn't long before all the dance bands in London had taken up The Man I Love. Strangely enough, I now had a London song hit on my hands without being able to sell a single copy. But I now felt The Man I Love was worthy of a place in any score I might write. So in 1927, when we brought out the first version of the musical comedy Strike Up the Band, this melody was again introduced. And again the melody met with scant success. Apparently, The Man I Love just lacked that thing so far as the theater presentation was concerned. However, its out-of-the-theater popularity continued to grow, And after considerable success in London and Paris, The Man I Love was sung in New York by an artist who has been almost directly responsible for its American success. I refer to that remarkable personality, Helen Morgan. So now I am going to ask Mr. Katzman and the orchestra to play this number for you, and if nobody minds, I shall attempt the piano part myself.
I'm interrupting just for a moment here. For those of you who don't know about the nuts and bolts of radio during this time, we should point out George Gershwin is reading off a script, which is fine because everyone in radio during this time read off a script because no one could see if you memorized lines, so you might as well have the words right in front of you, particularly if you're not a natural-born actor, and George Gershwin was not. That said, someone thought it was necessary for George Gershwin to say out loud, "If nobody minds, I shall play the piano." Does anyone here mind George Gershwin playing the piano? So now when people ask you what you did tonight, you can say, well, I sang along with Cole Porter and then I listened to George Gershwin play the piano. And we have proof that you actually did. So don't feel shy about claiming that. Many of you know, tragically, George Gershwin left us far too soon. He was 38 when he died in 1937. But he left behind a legion of friends and admirers like Larry Adler and Oscar Levant, the pianist who also became famous for his concert performances of the Rhapsody in Blue. In 1947, Oscar Levant was a featured performer on the Kraft Music Hall, the show that starred Al Jolson. You heard at the very beginning Al Jolson at the start of a Kraft Music Hall program. Well, what we have for you now is a few minutes of that particular show featuring Oscar Levant and guest Bing Crosby as they take a few minutes to pay tribute to George Gershwin.
You know, I could have been a singer.
Really?
But I came from a very poor family. I couldn't afford tonsils.
How'd you get hold of a piano?
My brother was a pickpocket.
Honestly, you ought to be glad you took a piano. Otherwise, you might never have known George Gershwin.
You're right, Al. George was an inspiration to many of us.
Well, I guess we all benefited by knowing George. Oscar by playing the Rhapsody in Blue, the Concerto, and Preludes. And Bing, you and I still have the privilege of singing his great songs.
Well, let's warm up Oscar and get after him, huh?
Deep in my heart, that melody will always linger.
Swanee, how I love you, my dear old Swanee. The folks up north won't see me no more when I get to that Swanee shore.
Someday he'll come along, the man I love, and he'll be good and strong, the man I love. And when he comes my way, I'll do my best to make him stay.
Oh, sweet and lovely lady, be good. Oh, lady, be good to me.
Somebody loves me, I wonder who. Maybe it's you.
Embrace me, my sweet embraceable you. Embrace me, my irreplaceable you.
I got rhythm, I got music, I got my gal who could ask for anything more. I got my gal who could ask for anything more. Who could ask for anything more?
It ain't necessarily so. Well, it ain't necessarily so. The things that your preacher is liable to teach you, well, it ain't necessarily so. It ain't necessarily so. Strike up the band, get a cymbal ring, all in one and all, to the martial swing. Strike up the band. There is work to be done, to be done. There's a war to be won, to be won. Come, you son of a gun. Take your stand. Falling like a bow. Come along, let's go. Hey, thee down, strike up the band.
Well, it's amazing, and I'm always grateful for the chance to share these amazing sounds from this amazing era, and my goodness, all these amazing performers. There's one aspect about radio we haven't talked about yet. Let me come back to here for a moment. There I am, and before we can conclude tonight's presentation, I'd like to bring you a word from our sponsor. I know you thought you were getting out of here scot-free, didn't you? No. If you enjoy what you have heard tonight, I hope you will join me for my radio show. Every Saturday afternoon from 1 to 5 Central Time, I host a show called Those Were the Days. It is in the Chicago area. It's heard at 90.9 FM WDCB. In the Missouri area, where the signal is probably not remotely able to be picked up, you can stream it live at wdcb.org. This coming Saturday, as a matter of fact, we will have an afternoon of shows, all from the year 1956. So there'll be an adventure of yours truly, Johnny Dollar. There'll be a Western drama starring Raymond Burr, Fort Laramie. And although I hesitate to say this in a show about the Great American Songbook, we will have a rock and roll dance party. This is an actual 1956 broadcast from Alan Freed with Chuck Berry and the Flamingos and Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers. So all of that's coming this Saturday on wdcb.org. Now, if you're thinking, how can I keep track of what's coming up on Those Were the Days? Well, the schedule is published in a magazine called the Nostalgia Digest. And I just happen to have the latest copy right here because, oh, and so, and thank you, someone is holding their copy up to their camera. Excellent. I thought I was staring in a mirror for a minute, except you're much better looking than I am. Every issue has not only the schedule for what we're playing, but it's also got articles about the golden age of radio, movies, music, and so forth. And as we've said before, our subscribers are the ones who make it possible for us to do what we do. So if you do subscribe, we thank you. If you don't, if you'd like to learn more about the magazine or the radio show, or how to get old-time radio shows on CD, I invite you to visit our website, nostalgiadigest.com. And that's where you can actually hear last Saturday's edition of Those Were the Days. You can also subscribe to the digest or get back issues. And again, you can get radio shows on CD, including some that you've heard tonight. Now, obviously, commercials were kind of a necessary evil during the golden age of radio. But thankfully, there were people who realized that commercials didn't have to be evil. And there were some people like Jack Benny who realized that it would work to your advantage if you could make the commercial as entertaining as the rest of your show. And Jack knew this from the beginning. Going not long ago on Those Were the Days, we played Jack's very first radio show from 1932, sponsored by Canada Dry. And he actually told the story about a girlfriend whose uncle had been to every night spot in New York, and now he was going north to drink Canada Dry. And I know I can't hear your laughter, but I'm sure it's there. Obviously, Jack and his writers got a lot better at this over time with the commercials they did for Jell-O and then for Lucky Strike cigarettes, a product of the American Tobacco Company. But Jack knew that when you had a product of the American Tobacco Company, it could only help to enlist the services of a great American songwriter.
Thank you very much. Goodbye, Mr. Goldwyn.
Well, Hoagie Carmichael.
Hello, Jack.
Gosh, Hoagie, here I am waiting to go into the office, and you came out. I didn't know you were in there.
I've been in that Goldwyn's office since 10 o'clock this morning.
Since 10 o'clock this morning, eh? What were you doing in there all the time?
I was just trying to convince him that my name is Hoagie and not Hugo.
Oh, yes. That happened at the Academy Award ceremonies when Mr. Goldwyn accidentally called you Hugo instead of Hoagie, but it was just a slight mistake.
A slight mistake? Jack, for 25 years, I built up the name of Hoagie Carmichael, and it wasn't easy. I remember when I first started writing songs, I used to sit up nights, no food, hardly enough money to pay the rent. I was ready to quit, but my wife encouraged me. She said, Hoagie, you can do it. My mother encouraged me. She said, Hoagie, don't give up. My friends encouraged me, Hoagie, stick to it.
And they were right. I can remember those great songs. Stardust by Hoagie Carmichael. Lazy Bones by Hoagie Carmichael. Old Buttermilk Sky by Hoagie Carmichael. They were all great, Hoagie.
And who gets all the credit? Some no-talent jerk named Hugo.
Well, Hoagie, maybe I can help you.
Oh, I wish you would, Jack. All I am now is an unknown character with $1 million.
Whoops. Okay, I'll clear up your name for you. I've got a big listening audience, and if you want to come on my program and do one of your songs, I'll let everybody know it was written by Hoagie Carmichael, not Hugo.
Gosh, if you do that, I'd be very grateful, Jack. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll sing Old Buttermilk Sky with a special arrangement that will include your quartet, The Sportsmen.
My quartet? No, I don't think that would... What
Now, just a minute. I've got a copy of it right here. Let me show you what I mean. Try to visualize it, Jack.
What?
Well, here's the way it would go. The introduction starts with full orchestra. Old buttermilk sky, I'm a-keeping my eye peeled on you. What's a good word tonight? Are you gonna be mellow tonight?
Tonight, LSMFT. Glad to say
cigarettes for Donzie and we. We're as happy as a Christmas tree, heading for the one we love.
I'm going to pop her the question, that question.
Wouldn't you like a lucky strike?
Yes, it'll be easy, so easy.
Well, that's the one that she will like.
LSMFT.
LSMFT.
They won't fail you when you're needing them most.
Oh, no.
Hang a package on her hitching post.
Lucky's for the one you love, the one you love.
So round and so firm.
So round and so firm.
That's part of their churn.
That's part of their churn.
Will they be naturally mild tonight?
Yes, sir. Why, sure, you bet. That's Lucky Strike.
What do you think, Jack? Could you visualize what I'm telling you?
Could I? Hoagie, I could even hear the applause.
Wow.
That's a wonderful song. Hoagie, would you mind autographing that copy for me?
Oh, not at all.
Thanks.
So long, Jack.
So long. Gee, that was nice of Hoagie to... Well, what do you know? He signed it Hugo Carmichael.
Well, on behalf of everyone who makes it possible to share these sounds with you after all these years, especially these great performers, once again, I want to thank Madeline and everyone at the Missouri Regional Library for making this get-together possible. And to all of you, thank you for making it worthwhile. Thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed the music as much as I have. And again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to submit them through the chat button, and I'll be happy to answer whatever I can. Let's see here. There's a chat button. What is phenolax? Okay. Phenolax is in fact a laxative. And back in the days when one didn't mention such things in public, Cole Porter could in the course of a song. But yes, to think if you were as great as Phenolax, you really were the top. Let's see. Oh, thanks. Well, thanks to everyone who's written in period. I know not everyone wrote in with a question, but it's lovely to hear from you. Oh, and okay, where do you find the recordings? Is there a repository? You know, probably in the internet age, there may be. There was not necessarily 40 and 50 years ago when a lot of collectors were digging up these sounds. But they really, then as now, they sort of come from everywhere. I mean, a lot of them were recorded onto what we call transcription discs, which are large 16-inch records that would be able to hold a 15 or 30-minute radio show. A lot of these, unfortunately, went the way of all flesh, either through neglect or malice or whatever the case may be. A lot of them were saved and preserved. And over time, as people began to track these things down, they would record them, they would share their recordings with other people. So over the years, we've found some that were recordings from this era that were available commercially. In other cases, we got them by, you know, trading with other listeners, with other radio fans. In some cases, a performer might turn over their collection of recordings of their show to an organization or a fellow collector. You know, it's possible that some actor who appeared on this show or that show was given recordings of it. And then there are sometimes we literally get calls from somebody who say, you know, my uncle was a staff musician at the NBC affiliate here in Chicago, and we have these discs in the attic and we have no use for them. We actually got one person who contacted us last year or 2 years ago, I guess, because they had a relative who worked for Armed Forces Radio overseas and had brought home a bunch of discs that had been recorded back in 1951 for the Armed Forces to play them around the world. So again, I would imagine at this point, probably it's likely that there are places where someone is simply sort of cataloging as much as they can and making it available as MP3s or low resolution files. But the fact is these shows, these recordings kind of come from anywhere and everywhere. And that's what makes it interesting. Is sometimes it's a collector, sometimes it's an actor who was there, sometimes it's things are being pulled out of the air on eBay. I know there's a fellow who is running through a collection that someone acquired, apparently some like 20,000 recordings that he's digitizing, you know, a month at a time. And a lot of work to do there. Let's see, what happened to Ira when George died? I know that Richard Rodgers teamed up with Oscar Hammerstein after Hart died. Ira Gershwin, to the best of my knowledge, continued to write. I think he was also something of a caretaker for the songs that he and his brother had written. I do want to say, one story about Ira Gershwin that I was talking earlier about interviewing Larry Adler, the harmonica player. Something I didn't mention is, well, two things. One, when I did this interview with Larry Adler, it was over the telephone. Larry Adler lived in London at the time, which, as all of you may know, is 6 hours ahead of us. Right now in London, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. And Larry Adler was an early riser, which meant he was available to do the interview at 7 o'clock in the morning his time, or 1 o'clock in the morning our time. If you've ever been kept awake for 90 minutes through pure adrenaline, you know what I was experiencing that night. Anyway, Larry Adler mentioned being friends with Ira Gershwin and George Gershwin, and how even in Ira's later years, he was still coming up with rhymes. And the one that Larry Adler cited was streptococcus, streptomycin, make a highball, put some iocin. Don't think it ever saw the light of day, but I was glad for that little scoop. Let's see. How long have you been doing your Saturday radio show? Those Were the Days has actually been on the air for almost 51 years, and I have been the host for the last 12. My predecessor was a wonderful man named Chuck Shaden, who did an awful lot to inspire a lot of people, myself included, to fall in love with the golden age of radio. But yes, I've been doing it now since July 4th, 2009. And it's been an amazing journey, and I've gotten to meet some amazing people along the way. And I should point out too, for those of you who are interested, that February on Those Were the Days is Jack Benny month. So if you enjoyed the Jack Benny clips you've heard today, there'll be a lot more Benny where that came from for the 4 weeks in February. You mentioned, you mentioned interviewing Larry Adler. Is this interview published somewhere, or was it on your radio show? It was in fact published in the Nostalgia Digest. I took over as publisher of Nostalgia Digest in 2005, but Mr. Shaden, my predecessor, published my interview with Larry Adler back in, I believe, the February-March 1997 issue. And in fact, that is out of print, as you would imagine, but if you go to nostalgiadigest.com, there's a button at the top that says Archives. And if you click on that, you'll find an archive of the first 30 years or so of Nostalgia Digest magazine, which was published as a periodical. And like I say, then I believe one of the issues you can link to is the February-March 1997 issue. And if you decide you'd like to go there, you can read what I wrote about Larry Adler and some of his musings about the past as well. I will say this, Larry Adler was a fascinating guy, and there was a joke in I guess, when he was writing his autobiography, that he was going to call it Name Drops Keep Falling on My Head, because he had known so many interesting people, you know, and told stories about, you know, Billie Holiday and Al Capone and George Gershwin. So yes, any chance you get to hear Larry Adler is always a good one. And yes, if you'd like to read my interview with him, I think that's the way to do it. Let's see. Now this is interesting. I understand when Rhapsody in Blue was first done, Gershwin didn't have a piece entirely written, and he improvised part of it. That's interesting. I had no idea. Some music scholar may be able to better verify that than I am, but that's an amazing story if it's true. And I'd really love to know what part it would have been improvised, because it all sounds so equally lively, you know. But George Gershwin certainly composed a lot of music in a very short time, and you know, it's great that we're still singing these songs today. So And so, okay, the person who asked about Larry Adler in the interview found it. Good, so it's still there. Glad to hear it. And again, if anyone else has any questions, feel free to submit them through the chat bar. Otherwise, you're released on your own recognizance. And I guess we can turn it back over to Madeline in the library if they have any more to say. But I will say again, thank you to all of you at the library who made this evening possible. Thanks to all of you who joined us this evening. It's been a real pleasure. I'm sorry it's not yet feasible for us to be in the same room at the same time. Hopefully that day will come, and hopefully we can all be together. At least in the meantime, we've got the golden age of radio to share, and I hope you'll stick around for some of the sounds we'll have on our radio show, and hopefully see you down the line. And Madeline, again, thank you to you in the library.
And thank you so much, Steve. Such wonderful music. It was great to hear all this. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, all.
Good evening.